We're on online, great. So thanks very much, everyone. I think we're going to start now with the last of the week, which is essentially a workshop on productivity and time management. So the first sort of section, I reckon this lasts about an hour. First section is going to be a little bit of sort of theory, and then we're going to go into essentially practical tools that we intend to use within the interdependence community. It may well be that there are other tools that you have used in the past, and certainly we're always open to new ideas, although just as a sort of starting point, I guess it's trying to get everyone using the same thing so that we have kind of cross-compatibility across the network, so to speak. So I'm just going to run through a quick summary then of some of the points, and then go into a little bit more detail. So we talked about this earlier in the week, and Joseph just mentioned it a moment ago, but I guess it's when thinking about pretty much whatever you're doing it properly or doing it well. And I remember that was something that I was always taught when I was growing up, and I think it's a helpful mindset in thinking about how you're then going to apply yourself in pretty much whatever task. And I guess it's important thing to also note is that perhaps not everything we do we're going to enjoy, but sometimes it's perhaps in service of a higher cause, and it may also be that we learn something in the process. So I guess another key point here is managing your time and not letting it or circumstance manage you. I think it's very easy in our modern society where we have a million different distractions to essentially, if we're not consciously thinking about time management, to be often distracted or derailed. So I think it's a really important point, and that requires conscious thought and effort. So, for example, checking emails at specific times of the day, rather than always every time, say, a new email comes in, being distracted, or a new WhatsApp message, and whatever it might be, because that is essentially pulling us towards almost somebody else's. Often it might be that they have a request of you, and we'll talk about that a bit more. But thinking very consciously about when is it that I check my phone? Is it actually just once an hour at a specific time? Do I have a time in the calendar to look at emails? Thinking about using your most productive time wisely. There's a podcast that is in that reading list. I was just listening to it this morning. One of the things that I think this person was mentioning, the reason I put it in there is that it's kind of particularly relevant, perhaps people who might have recently left university. And the point he was making is that once you leave, say, education, that's the first time where you've had a kind of structure which has been more or less dictated by someone else. And to some extent, once you're free, that also means that you're able to optimize your time. Typically most companies do 9 to 5, but actually, it might not be that you might not be productive at 9 in the morning. So really thinking about that and then using it for the things that you get the most out of at specific times. Another sort of almost rule or maxim that I've borrowed from someone else, but if something really is just going to take a minute and it's sort of in front of you, it's just a good idea to just do it. There are some things, if we're thinking in the context of time management, so it's almost the opposite of what I was just saying about being constantly drawn in by different emails, where you might want to think, I'm actually going to schedule time for doing that. On the other hand, if something really is just a quick thing, better to do it rather than almost wasting the time filing it away to do it later. That's almost creating more admin. And there's also the cognitive burden of thinking, I've got to do that annoying, niggly little thing. So yeah, that's a useful one to live by. Okay, so prioritization, really key in terms of thinking about how we organize ourselves. In fact, it's probably the key thing. And the more I've thought about this in recent years, the more I've sort of realized there's such an art to it, because it's such a dynamic, fluid thing, our priority list. Time is always moving, and so are we, so are the priorities, so are the different things that we need to do. I mentioned this book the other day. Also in this book, they mention, or they remind us that actually the word priority that we often talk about, what are my priorities for today, is actually supposed to be a singular concept. So maybe it would be helpful whenever you are thinking about prioritizing to think, what is the one thing I absolutely need to do? And then also to be thinking in terms of sequence, what is the first thing I need to be doing? What is ultimately my priority? I mean, that's what the word means. It might sound silly to be sort of saying that, but I'll give you an example. We've been trying to sort of as quickly as possible record these and send them out to the people who are watching at home, but I also had to prepare my slides today, and I felt that I felt a sort of a pressure to get that email out, but actually clearly the priority is getting the slides done because I had to do that in 3 hours. And I think it's always very easy, for whatever reason, for us to not do the thing that actually is at the top of the priority queue. So there we go, it's an apt example for this presentation. Now, this is a model that somebody recommended to me to watch, and I had a look at it. It's a useful little TED Talk. I've put the link in there. And there's quite a few good ideas in there, but this model, and they've trademarked it, yeah, we've honoured that here. But it's essentially the idea that you're thinking about what actually doesn't need to be on the to-do list, and then what can I automate? So is there a process you can set up so that you're essentially designed out of it, and what can you delegate? Personally, I've sort of remembered this in a slightly different way of defer, delegate, automate. So I think that let's just sort of go through this in a little bit more detail. You might often find that, if you're anything like me, that you end up with a very long to-do list. But in that process of ongoing prioritization, you might actually find that every time you review it, there are certain things that actually never seem to really need to get done or are never really priorities. And so, to some extent, it's very important to think about that just in the context of, what maybe isn't quite as important as we might have thought it was, or is it perhaps that the time sensitivity and the nature of it in that respect means that it really just doesn't need to be done anymore? So I think that's always really important to be asking that. Or just constantly thinking about it in terms of, well, maybe that doesn't need to be done until a later time. A good example of that, different people work in different ways, but for me, if I'm, let's say, going into a meeting that I need to prepare for and I need to, know who that person is, know their background, I might have thought about, say, the general strategy before, but typically I would look up their information closer to the time so that it's fresh in my mind. I mean, everyone has different memory and stuff, so if you're not so good at remembering it just before, maybe that doesn't work. But thinking about the time sequencing. Okay, so delegate. Now, that's not always in a sort of hierarchical sense of the general dishing out the orders, but if you're working in a team, you'll often find that it's not always that easy to be distributing tasks up between a group of people. So just making sure that it isn't one person doing almost too much of the work so that actually they don't really do any of it very well, or they don't get it all done in time. So thinking, how can that be distributed? And we've talked about automate a little bit before, so I won't go over that again. Okay, and then if ever you're thinking, oh my God, I've got so much stuff to do, how do I prioritize? I think it's just always helpful just to think back to the mission, the purpose. What is it we're actually trying to do? What are we solving for? And I really do mean that at the sort of higher level, because that might well help you to distill through to what are actually those really critical tasks. There's some other, I guess, thinking around that where maybe this is slightly more of a strategic point, but it's, what are those things on my to-do list that can advance me as far as possible on that progress bar, if you like. So there may be certain things that, if we just go back to this idea of say, delegating, you might have to invest 2 hours to teach somebody how to do something or explain a process or whatever it might be, but then suddenly that's unlocked 100 hours. So your return on time investment is ultimately positive. And it's the same in terms of thinking about what are those things on my to-do list that are really, if you think about the 80-20 rule, what are those 20% of tasks that are going to get me 80% of the progress? And actually really trying to get rid of the other 80%. Okay, so I think this is a really important point, and it's one that we've tried to employ in the different organisations I've been involved with over the years. And it's in terms of thinking, I guess it's very much from when you're working in a team. So who am I blocking by not doing that task? So to give you an example, if somebody is relying on you to reply to an email, to then know what they're supposed to be doing, to produce a report, and there's a deadline, the longer you are delaying in giving them that information, well, actually the more difficult and probably stressful their life is becoming. So that's not a very effective way for an organisation or essentially a network to be operating. So if you think about yourself as a node within a network, and that's certainly what we're trying to do within this movement, this might not always be true, depends on what's going on, but ultimately the maximum sort of the group can only move at the pace of the slowest member, and therefore it's very important to make sure that we're not slowing anyone down, and also when we're thinking about our priorities and our strategy, making sure that we're enabling everybody to do what they need to be doing. Okay, so something that we've employed over the years and that we found very useful in terms of actually implementing that. If you're using email as your primary communication system, most people have email these days, most people are familiar with it, then the subject line that you use, so the way we did it was to have a square brackets at the beginning of the subject line and to either say urgent, important, or just nothing, so just a normal subject line. Doesn't have to be in capitals if you don't want to sound like you're shouting. I've just done that to make it clearer here. But the idea being that urgent is really saying, I need a reply from you quickly, ideally within what we would sort of consider an email cycle, so half a day, kind of tops, in order for me to progress with my task. So when somebody sees that, they know someone's counting on me here, I need to do something. Important is to indicate that a reply or some sort of action is required, but it's not so high priority, and actually we're saying, please prioritize that according to your own schedule. Obviously you don't really, don't want to be waiting weeks for emails to come back. That's not very effective communication lines. And then if there is no square brackets, then it's really just saying this is for your information. Perhaps you're sharing an article about something. And we found that to be very effective. We'll talk a bit in a minute about how you can actually label that in Gmail so that all of those emails are flagged and maybe even color-coded to your favorite color. Okay, so time management theory. So a few things here. I think really being respectful of your own time, I think, is really important. I mean, we only have a limited amount of time, however long we think we are going to live. So it's worth using it wisely. It's probably the constant for everyone. But also, maybe even more importantly, being respectful of other people's time. So always asking yourself, how much time am I encroaching or taking of someone else's, and thinking perhaps about ways that you can almost be more economical with their time. I think people really appreciate that, especially the busier or the more important somebody is. If you're making their life difficult by costing them a lot of time, they're generally not going to be that appreciative or happy with you. So an example of how you might want to think about that is in communications. So something I've observed over the years is there's often a sort of, you might meet somebody new or they send you an email and they say, I'd like to go for a coffee. And for some people, it's kind of a dream. It's this lovely, fluid experience where you just meet them and it's quick. You arrange something and it's very smooth. And others, it turns into a 20 email back and forth. Where are we going to meet? What day? What time? Can you do this specific date? No, I can't. And you end up in this sort of email tennis, and it's just painful. Particularly if your job involves scheduling meetings and you sort of think, gosh, you're inflicting this on hundreds of people probably. So there are ways you can avoid doing that, and it's actually very simple. This is something I originally learned from Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Workweek, but just give people options. Hello, would you like to meet for a coffee? For this reason, here are 3 dates. And yes, sometimes it can seem maybe almost overly efficient to be trying to limit the communication. I probably go too far that way. I know some of my friends have accused me of being a bit like that, so I apologise to everyone for whenever I do it. But certainly in a business context or a professional context, I think it's very reasonable to be trying to respect somebody else's time and being efficient in terms of how you conduct yourself. I think there's also another point to make, which is that when you don't really know somebody, especially when you haven't met them in person, and all they're judging you on is a faceless email, it's, what is your spelling like, what is the grammar like, and how smooth is that interaction? So these kinds of things, already sort of elevate you into whatever it might be, the top 10% of people who can actually do these things smoothly. And it's not difficult, anyone can. If you haven't seen already, in the campaigns guide is a tool that I recommend called Grammarly, which is free, and you can install it on your emails, and then there's really no excuse for making a spelling mistake again. And if you're a foreign, non-native speaker, definitely get it. Even, we all make mistakes, natives or not. Okay, so this is something that was explained when I was working at Google, this kind of time management theory. So this is just a Google Calendar screenshot here. So you've got your 7 days of the week. I've just kind of focused in on one of them. I hope you can actually see that. But the idea being that you might have a specific block of time. So I put here deep work, do not disturb, where you're saying, okay, this is the time that I'm going to really get into the task of, my main priority for the day. And then I'm actually consciously saying, I'm going to check my emails, but perhaps not as the first thing I do in the morning. Often that is the sort of the reflex to want to do that. But actually, if you know that perhaps you've got to write a report and you've got a deadline, is checking your email going to help? Or actually, is it going to add 10 more things to your to-do list that may or not be your actual priorities? So I guess this is almost like thinking about it maybe as reclaiming your time from, say, the digital realm where it's so easy to be pulled in different directions. And what I would also say is that thinking about how you structure your time, and whatever sort of stage you're at, whether it be within full-time employment, doing a volunteer project, having a break, whatever it might be, even scheduling time, which is designed to be nothing planned, is sort of in a way still scheduling. But thinking about how you do that can be very useful. So just one point to say here is that the idea with using Google Calendar is that we can actually all be, or say you're in a working group with 5 other people, you can share each other's calendars, and then it's a lot easier to schedule meetings because you can see when everyone's free or busy if you're actually using them properly. Okay, so we talked about this a little bit the other day, but in terms of thinking about what tasks can I group, and that might be in terms of specific work-related ones, but also things like if you're wanting to perhaps read more, can I combine that with something like, exercise routine or getting the tube, whatever it might be. I think that's a helpful one for managing time, particularly if you're trying to, if you're feeling overwhelmed, you've got a lot on the to-do list, I think that's just definitely an effective way to be more productive. All right, so what I'm going to do now then is go through the main tools that we're using. You're probably familiar with most of them, but I guess they're sort of showing you a few, well, I don't know if you'd call them advanced features. They're all very accessible, but also sort of how we integrate them all how we integrate them all. So I'm going to switch now to just going through those. So what we're recommending people to do is actually create an email account specifically for their work within the interdependence movement, because that means that you've got essentially a clean email account. I don't know about you, but I've got a few accounts that have got 10,000 unread emails in them, and it's all a bit stressful. My professional ones I don't have like that, but email accounts from 10 years ago. Also, they might not always have the most professional aliases. So essentially the thinking here is to create an account where it might be first name. So I actually created one here. It went a bit wrong. We ended up with John Smith and then Kirsty Johnson in the same email. But anyway, it's just an example. And the suggestion was perhaps first name dot last name dot IC for interdependence community, and then there's a bit of coherence and easier to find. And the good thing about these, why we're recommending using these Gmail or Google related tools, they're all free, which is also helpful. So should move that out of the way. Okay, so you've created your email account. There are a few things then to do effectively to get it set up. So I'm just going to kind of run through those now. Let's just have a look. Okay, so we talked, can everyone see that okay, or does it need to be a bit bigger? Yeah, I might just go one size bigger. Oops. Okay, so maybe we'll just start with the settings. So a couple of things in here. And you can always just check back over this one, this progress bar. But so one in particular, so default reply behavior. I really suggest ticking reply to all. Case in point, some of us have the social media working group. We've got a few people in there already, and we might reply to say 5 people. That's how I send an email to 5 people saying, this is what we're thinking of doing, and it's a question to the group, and then I get a reply from one person, most probably because they haven't enabled this button, and then that cuts off 5 other people in the group, which is quite frustrating, and then you have to sort of CC them back in and all the rest of it. So handily, Gmail has created the default reply to all. Obviously, remember to to use the other option if you want to reply privately. I would actually recommend, if you do want to sort of break out of a thread, potentially starting a new thread, because in Gmail it all groups by the subject. Okay, what else? There's a thing here where you have an undo send button. Now, of course, you should always be proofreading your emails perfectly before you send them. But as we all know, sometimes we've missed something. I definitely recommend having that on there, and you can have it set for 30 seconds if you want. So that's 30 seconds to pull it back out of the internet. Okay, so then you've got, next one, email signature. So let me just see if I can, So if you have a look in the How We Work document, we've created an email signature template which includes the interdependence logo in there. And it's just generally, I think, quite professional to have, particularly if you are affiliated with an organisation, what is that? What's the link to it? Obviously, you don't always want to be giving out your phone number, but if that is something you want to be doing for your contacts, it does just help people get in touch with you, particularly if you're mainly using this for other people that you're working with on a project. So I would encourage you to have your phone number with the country code and anything else. Maybe I have my Skype ID in there as well. So you can put that in the signature line. One thing just to say is that you'll probably have seen how So if we just do a little test here, Sam Gill, interDependence, let's just say normally we'd have the logo, and then we want to save it at the bottom. And then when we go to compose, that should be at the bottom. And you see these little lines. Quite often when that actually comes out at the other end, this is all in grey or you don't see it. So I would say if you do want to say something like, maybe just, so common sort of in English we would use things like best regards, kind regards, best wishes if you want as well. I would usually put your name as well, usually with a comma as well. Because if you don't put your name and you're just relying on the signature, it will usually look grey, and so it will look like it's sort of copied and pasted, which just isn't quite that same feeling of an actual signature at the end. All right, so that's that one. Then we'll just have a look at, so if we go back to settings, you can actually also link accounts within Gmail. So if you've got an account already and you want them to import in, so you're just using one email inbox, and you can also say which email you want to be sending it out from. You can do that from where is it? Accounts and imports. Add another email address. I actually wouldn't recommend doing that because then you're back to having everything in the same place. But it really depends, because if you're never going to check this, which hopefully you will, but if you're likely to forget, then that could be another workaround. Let's just have a quick look. All right, so those were kind of some of those simple ones. That was another one. So you can also add a profile picture. I think you have to go up here and click on the little button. And then add a photo. I would suggest that that's just a bit more personable. Somebody also added the interDependence logo. You can also do that if you want, whatever you feel like. All right, a couple of other perhaps useful features would just be that, let's have a look at this in here. So there's something called, is it in there? Maybe they've moved it from this one. Okay, no, we'll move on for that. So going back to what I was saying earlier about urgent and important emails, so what you can do is effectively create a, where is it here? So we go back to settings, and you go to labels. So you have the, essentially the default labels. You can create your own. So you go down to the bottom to do that, create new label. So for example, we're going to create one that says urgent. And maybe we're going to create another one that says important. And then they pop up over here. You could actually have done that also, I think, from over here directly. There we go, create new label. So maybe you've got one that says to do. I wouldn't recommend having more than sort of 3 active ones that you're really using. You might have a few that are actually almost bookmarks, but I'll explain a little bit more about how you might want to use that in a moment. If you've got lots of labels, and also just generally a useful filing kind of trick is to actually put a number in front of them. So if we put urgent as number 1, that should be at the top of the list, and important as number 2. If ever you have a folder that has lots of things in it and you want something to be automatically at the top, either a 0 or a 1 should do that. Okay, so you can also color code these. So maybe your urgent is red, maybe your important is, I don't know, orange or whatever it might be. And then what you can do is actually create a filter. Let's have a look. Sorry, that's the wrong one. Let's see. I like the. I feel like the business version of this is slightly different, so sorry, bear with me. Oh yeah, here we go. All right, so create new filter. So you can do all kinds of things here. So you could have, for example, any email from Sam or from whoever it might be is going to have a specific criteria or label applied to it. Or you might have, so here, for example, if the subject is or has the word urgent in it, then I want to create a filter. And so what I'm going to do is to say I want to apply the label urgent to all emails like that. And that should, you can also apply it to existing conversations, should mean that any email now that comes in will automatically have that label. Okay, so going back to this time management theory, I might just switch back to the slide for a second. So going back to the idea that there are going to be specific times when you're actually going to be looking at email, the sort of part of the logic here is that when you are going to check your email, it might well be that you almost need a good filing system to put the emails that you've discovered, where you have tasks attached to them, away, unless they are these micro tasks that you actually are going to work on, or that you've perhaps scheduled your 1 hour to deal with that. So how can you do that effectively? Well, first of all, and I would say this is probably the biggest, if you take one thing from all of this, it's this, to set your inbox to unread first. Often you'll see somebody's got 1 million emails in there. I do think that there's almost like a cognitive burden being created by thinking, oh my God, I've got 10,000 emails to read. So the theory that they taught us at Google was you use unread first. That means all your unread emails are going to be at the top. And you're always trying to get your email inbox to 0. So 0 unread emails. And the way you do that is every time you're in your email mode, so let's say after lunch, end of the day, you're going to these emails and you're essentially filing them in the correct place. So you read it, either it's just read, so that's it, done. Or it's something like, it's an urgent task. So once I've gone through all the emails, I'll just click on the urgent label and work through those. Or it's perhaps to do, but maybe it's not urgent. So it's to do when I'm actually working through those tasks. And you can quite easily just label them from here. And then if, for example, I go to urgent, it should be in there. No, what happened? Okay, that didn't work. Yeah, okay, so that should now be in here. There we go. And from there, you can very easily just remove the label once. So it's almost like a way of having a to-do list live in Gmail where you can, so you've ticked it, and then you can just remove that label. Right, now it's done. Great. Yeah, maybe one other thing just to mention briefly is there's also a chat function. So you can add people in your group, and then that way you can talk just directly within your email. That could work. It might be that I think each individual group should be discussing what is the best sort of instant communication technique, whether it be we're recommending using Signal. Lots of people use WhatsApp. I do use WhatsApp. I've been using Telegram more and more, and Signal as well. I've just been increasingly horrified that it seems that my data is kind of being used in dodgy ways by the likes of Facebook, which is one of the reasons we're trying to build that platform. Anyway, I won't go into that now. All right, so that's essentially email. A couple other things just to mention in general. So one of the things that, so you can see over here, you can get to your calendar, but everything is actually kind of nested in this little, these dots over here. So for example, calendar, drive. I actually find that quite annoying. And so what I recommend doing is, you see this bookmark bar at the top. So I've already put the Google Drive button in there so I can just reach it, or the calendar. What you can also do if you've got lots of them is edit, and you can even delete the text altogether, and then you just have a little icon I would suggest having your sort of 5 or 6 most used bookmarks just there. Again, if you think about how many hours you probably spend in front of a laptop, typing Google every time versus pressing a button, these things do add up. Okay, so that's essentially Gmail. Maybe before moving on to the next bit, does anyone have any other good tips or any questions? All right, okay, well in that case we'll move on.
Have you seen the dark thing?
The dark thing.
The dark theme.
Oh, theme, yeah.
On Gmail, yeah.
Yeah, let's do that. That's cool.
It's just personal taste, but
yeah.
As well. There is a black one in there somewhere.
Yeah, I was.
There it is.
Or there's one that's almost like sort of like a terminal as well.
It's easier on the eye.
There you go. Yeah. So that's. I take an interesting project for the research data and analysis team would be working out if this is actually better or worse, because I've read conflicting things.
Like for your eyes?
I don't know energy use. Because depending on what the correct answer is, we might want to think about that as a design feature, or at least have a skin change for the platform.
Can I just, on a totally slightly different point, have you heard of Ecosia? This search
yeah,
engine
yeah.
that claim every time you run a search with them, they plant a tree. All the money they make goes to planting trees, so I use this as my default browser.
It's not actually when you run a search though, it's when you click on an advert, like AdWords.
I never do, maybe I should just go.
You just need to sit there clicking on the adverts.
So they don't make anything, right? Unless you click an ad, is that how it works?
That's how they're making money, so yeah.
What? This is scam. We were all told in school, like every time you click enter, they plant a tree.
It probably helps them get funding and stuff.
Sorry?
How much is it per click?
Oh, it depends. It's depends on the keyword. So, for example, something like mortgages, which are like as Joseph was explaining, could be £300,000. Companies will bid a lot more money for those high-value keywords because they're all competing. So it's like an auction.
On a different note, is this not a bit too like for the eyes?
Yeah, I mean, it's preference. We'll change it back.
I mean, to anyone, does anyone prefer black over white?
I do.
Really?
Yeah,
Where did we go?
Everything,
Yeah, I mean, you could go for something a little bit more in the middle. Anyway, you can play around with the themes on your own time. But okay, so
Let's go with grey,
yeah, okay, right. What I want to do then next is go to calendar. So, as I say, you can either go like that from over here, but really what you want to be doing is bookmarking that. Let's try that again. So that you can easily access it, and you might want to. I don't know if that's possibly. No, that's gone to students. Right, sorry. Try again. Okay, so I set this up on purpose as a new account so that if you're doing this yourself in the same boat, so you'll see that the default here is running from Sunday to Saturday. You can change that. You can pretty much change anything in the settings. Most important thing to do is make sure that you're on the right time zone. If you're on the wrong time zone, that is going to mess up all of your meetings and it won't be very helpful. So just check you're in the right country. The date format is in the one that actually makes sense for you. And that the time, again, makes sense. You can also show a world clock and you can add different time zones. So if half of your team is in a different place, that could be quite a useful feature. You can also specify the duration default of meetings. So if you're a super busy person and you only have 5-minute slots like Elon Musk, then you can do that here. And there we go. So start the week on. Personally, I'd like to start it on Monday. Show 5 days. Okay. And what you can then do is add other people's calendars. So you can subscribe to a calendar. So obviously you need their email address and they have to give you permission. But if everyone has created a new email just for this purpose, then that can be quite helpful. And so what would be really a useful technique would be to, a lot of people aren't going to be working full time on this. So if we say, look to next week, it might be to say, well, I'm available to work Tuesday. So I don't know, maybe we're just going to put interdependence. Maybe my next availability is at this time at the weekend. And that way other people in the team know that's when you're available. And then once you've added their calendar and they've approved it, it will appear down this left-hand side here. So you can toggle them on and off. So that's my calendar here. And you can add all sorts of other calendars if you need. Okay, so maybe just to go back to probably the most useful function of this calendar is actually to create an event and invite other people to it. So this is really the reason we're suggesting to use this. So, I don't know, meet up to talk about working group. So you write the title, you then click on the little edit button and you can go in and get more detail. So you can change the time and the date. So where you have a location, so a lot of what we're going to be doing, because not everyone will be in the same place. Obviously, if you are in the same place, then that's great, and we encourage you to meet up in person, like we're doing here now. But for most of it, it's going to be working remotely, and so you can click to have Hangouts as the default meeting. And again, talking about efficiency, if I now invite you all to that meeting, we've all got one link, we click on it, we're in a meeting. Easy. We had some issues where we were using something other than this interface with the invites being sent out. But if you do that from the web browser interface, it should work. So you can invite people to that. There we go, I'll just use my shorter email address, and then that person will get an email invite and they can add it to their calendar. Okay, so that's, and maybe just before going off that, if it's an in-person meeting, we would encourage you to actually put the address, and it will handily give a map for whoever's trying to find it. So try and get that one in there. It just makes everyone's life easier. All right, and just going back, so you can also have events that repeat. For example, where we go, weekly on a Thursday. So let's say that your working group has found a slot that works for everybody, and you've got a time you want to do a meeting, then the idea would be to have that on repeat. And then again, you have less admin trying to always find a time. If you are trying to coordinate for meetings, a really handy tool is called Doodle, which you may or may not have used, but it's a free tool, and you create an account, and essentially what it enables you to do, I've got one here. So I can't remember my password. Okay, I won't go into that right now, but essentially what it enables you to do is provide multiple options, send a link, and everyone says the dates that they can do. And that, again, saves a lot of time with a back and forth. So I recommend if you've got more than 3 people, just doing that, and trying not to give too many options for dates, because otherwise it just makes it a bit more complicated as well.
Sorry, Sam, what was Doodle?
Sorry, yeah, sorry, I didn't explain that very well. So Doodle, let me sign up and we'll do one.
I have something I can recommend to help with this kind of situation. Have you heard of LastPass before?
Oh, yeah. So that was another, that's great.
Lifesaver for me.
Yes.
So you only need one password, and it will just generate like 20-character passwords for everything else that you have. So LastPass is called. And then there's a little icon in the top right of the screen. You can just click it, and then you can say fill, and basically then it'll ask you for your LastPass password. And then you can do 2-factor authentication, so you can type in a code from your phone as well, and then it'll just fill in your password straight. So basically it means you just never forget another password as long as you have your LastPass one.
I'll use your one.
For each for whatever software you're dealing with?
Yeah, anything. Well,
application?
yeah, I mean, I can Yeah, exactly. So it'll, every time you make an account with something, it'll pop up in the top right of the screen and say, add this to LastPass.
Yeah.
And you can just click add. Anyway.
Definitely recommend that.
It's a whole thing.
Using someone else's computer, that's why this is going wrong. But there we go. Okay, right, so we're in now. So you create a group meeting. Let's call it working group meetup. Let's say location is going to be a conference call or a Google Hangout. And the idea, so this is giving today's date. Just try and get that a bit bigger. And let's say it's going to be for next week. So it's showing me the dates, the things that I already put in, the times. And what you want to do then is just find some slots that you're saying, I can do these times, and you're going to ask everyone else if they can as well. You can also, I think, view it in a slightly different view. But yeah, that's probably the easiest. So once you've put a few options, it goes to you go through there. You pretty much just can skip all this, and you get given a link, or you can send them the email.
Could you add my email address in so I can see it? Andrew at Cormac. CORMACK.
MACK.
Yeah, .net. Sorry, I'm just interested.
Okay. Oh god, here we go.
Oh.
So apparently this is actually so that their driverless cars can recognize traffic lights. So they're outsourcing humans. Oh, sorry, that was stairs, not cars.
The classic example is where you say one thing, you do the thing, you just
So
say
that-
rather than the thing that you
So this is actually what it will look like for Andrew when he gets that email, and you just tick the options you can do. And if I've sent that to multiple people, then you'll all get that. And then you can just go to close poll, and it will pick the best time.
So it's basically, it's just like you just showed.
Yeah, I mean these free tools exist, and so we should be using them because they just make our lives a lot easier. All right, so that's pretty much it for Google Calendar. Actually, apart from, we're just going to go over what a Hangout looks like. In fact, Andrew, maybe we can use your computer again for this one. So it was Andrew at Cormac.
CORMACK.net.
So I'm adding, I'll actually just make this then for now. What do we, so say 2 o'clock. Oops. So we've got a Hangout, we've invited the person, we're going to press save. Now, in reading about different software to do these webinars, it's potentially Hangouts you need to be using Google Chrome, so if you are having problems with it, just download Google Chrome. Why is that event not here then? What happened there? Okay, something went a bit wrong with the dates. So I was trying to make that for today. There we go. This event. All right, so yeah, you can always get back to today's date with this button at the top. So we're just going to test a Hangout so everyone knows what that is. So did you get the email, Andrew?
I've got an email actually.
Am I spelling your name wrong, or looks like
No,
it?
that's
It's got a
me.
picture.
So,
Do you want to just
spam maybe.
refresh? Oh, it might be.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay, so on our end, so it's just asking. So I'm the first one here. Okay, well, it does, yeah, there we go, great. Hi, Andrew. Maybe just mute so we don't get the feedback. Yeah, okay.
Shall I just quit?
Yeah, I can just stay there for effect. Does it matter if I just kill the volume on here? Okay, so one thing to say is that the person you click on at the bottom will change who you see on your end. Does that make any difference for you, Andrew? When I click the different button?
No.
No? Okay, so that's just on your side. Obviously, to hang up down at the bottom, you can kill the camera. You might not always be presentable, but generally speaking, I would say that because we are doing a lot of work remotely, anything we can do to kind of reintroduce the human dynamic would be good. So do try to use a camera. We kind of did this on the fly, but generally what I would recommend always doing is having headphones so that you're minimizing the background noise and the feedback. One of the most frustrating things is doing a conference call and getting loads of background noise or feedback. Also, you'll see that, so Andrew has muted, so have I. As a general sensible protocol would be that when you log in, just to mute yourself, particularly if you're in a loud environment, if you're not speaking. If you're in a quiet environment, it's not such a big deal. Okay, so just to kind of run through a couple of other features. So you've got a chat box over here. So hello, Andrew. That pops up. We've got the, so you can invite more people. You can get a link to share. I think you can also just copy the link in the URL. And where is the button to share the screen? Okay, there we go. So the, actually maybe just also to say, within the little cog, you can also change the settings so that, there we go, bandwidth. So if you've got a low quality internet connection, first thing I would suggest doing is killing your camera, because that's what's using up most of the bandwidth. But you can also change the quality of the video going out and coming in. And for example here, you can just have audio only. So worth bearing that in mind. But probably the most useful thing you can do, particularly if you're, say, working together, doing a meeting, and you want to have somebody taking minutes, writing notes, then you can share the screen. And you can either share an application or the entire screen. I have previously sometimes had problems sharing an individual application, so some ways it's just easier sharing the whole screen. But that means that then Andrew should be able to see what's going on my computer. So that's a really handy tool. Backup, if this doesn't work, I would suggest using Skype. So you can have, I think it's, I have to double check, I know they keep changing the numbers. Skype is up to 25 people in a meeting for free. Google it's either 10 or 25. Yeah.
Sorry, where was the screen share button? Sorry.
Let me go back. So yeah, it's one of the things that they could. Oh God, is that a fire alarm? Sorry about that. We just had a fire alarm test. So Margaret had a good question, which is at what point would somebody essentially be able to use the interdependence agency name in their signature? So what, Julian? Can I just? Have you got Google Docs open at all? Do you know? In the other. Yeah. Okay. Let me just answer that. So essentially, the way we're kind of making this work is that the interdependence agency is a company, and it has responsibilities as a company as to essentially representing itself properly. However, the interdependence brand and name is basically open source, and we're kind of supporting it. That's what the interdependence agency is there to do. So anyone is free to use the interdependence brand and the logo, as long as they're essentially agreeing to our overarching principles and generally speaking, the ethos of the project. So to answer the question, you can use the interdependence logo and brand as of now, or as but not the interdependence agency one. And I'll just go into the how we work document, because, and hopefully that is in there, because we've added that in there. Let me just move this. Okay, so this is the document which is designed to be the kind of handbook for the interdependence community. So where is it? There we go, email signatures. And what we've done here is copy an example email signature. So that's actually what I meant to get earlier, that you can put into your Gmail as soon as you like. and you can use that logo. We'll probably try and make sure that's a slightly higher resolution one going forward, but it's good enough for now. Yeah, so hopefully that answers that question. All right, so let's go back to where we were. Yeah, all right, I'm going to close the Hangout. Okay, yeah, so last two things then is really how, or last three things. So we're just going to go over Google Drive and Google Docs and then finish on Trello and then wrap it up. So always get a bit confused about the naming with this, but so we should see, okay, so here we go. So I shared earlier the interdependence shared drive folder with myself, just to show you how to add a drive folder to your own personal drive. So that if you've got that email, or we've created essentially a repository of links which should have everything you need. And so if you click on that or you click open, you should open up Google Drive, and let's have a look. So it will open in shared with me, so that's something that somebody else has shared with you. And what you can do is add it to my drive. So if you click that button, it's now in your drive. And what we're doing is essentially putting, so personally I find this view a bit difficult, so I'm just going to change it to list view. So the idea is all the things that everyone within the community might need to access and use, we'll be putting in this shared drive folder. So the first one is this link repository, which is basically a link to all the other things, just so you've got one place where you can find everything. And so we've got all the social media accounts up here. Okay. Then we've got these key documents, so the campaigns guide, the how we work, the shared drive folder, the different folders. And then I've been adding the webinars we've been doing and the slides. So you can hopefully sort of find all of that. Things like resources. So again, hopefully it should all more or less make sense. That's where the suggested reading list is, for example. So that's hopefully relatively straightforward. So let's say now that you're in a working group, and it makes sense for sort of one person to do this, probably the person coordinating it, but whoever has delegated that role. So let's say we go into the right folder and we create a new one which says new working group test. So that's now a folder, and the idea would be that all the files pertaining to that group would go in that folder. And so if you are in the folder view, as we are here now, you can click new and create a new Google Doc, a new Google Sheet, some slides, whatever it might be. You can also create Google Forms, which can be useful, for example, if you're doing a survey of maybe a local community. What do you think about X? Or you're testing, maybe trying to get some data on something, essentially. You can also brand them, which we did with the ones on the website. Okay, so, and the reason I mention that is if you are just generally in your drive and you create something new, it won't be in that folder. It'll just be in your drive. So just watch out for that one. So let's call this test document. And once you've created a document, you'll see a folder appear. And if you click on that, you can then reorganize it and move it. So I'm going to now move this into the, it's a little bit fiddly, this panel. You can't see everything. There we go, so the test one, I'm putting it in there. I click move here. It's now in that folder. So I'm just going to run through very briefly some of the kind of key features in here. I'm sure you've all used a word processing platform before. It's basically exactly like Word. I actually find it more user-friendly than Word. And the main advantage is that it's in the cloud and it's saved every few seconds. So if your computer explodes, the work will still be saved. Okay, so just a couple of things. if you are trying to have a kind of neat, organized document that other people are going to be using, then having, so if we just sort of, write some silly text, and then maybe we have a title, and maybe we've got a subtitle. If you click on, so this will all be normal. Yeah, I think they might have actually integrated Grammarly into Google Docs, which is quite handy. If not, there's definitely a plugin. So this will all be normal text, as you can see here. And if we make this title, say for example, heading 1, and we make the subtitle heading 2, and then we go to the top of the document, and we do insert table of contents. And I would always, if we just agree we use the left-hand one, it will make life easier. Then we can see that we've got a contents at the top and page numbers. And that will update automatically just by clicking this little refresh button. So it's always a good idea if you're trying to organize a document to have a contents and label things clearly. You can also add page numbers. So insert header and page number, and then it doesn't matter so much, but as long as there's a page number somewhere. Okay, but probably the most useful thing that Google Docs enables you to do is to share that with other people. So if you have created something within a shared folder that is shared, let's say, between 5 people in your working group, and you all have edit and organize rights, then everyone in that group will be able to edit the document. So once you've created the shared folder, you shouldn't have to worry too much about continually sharing documents. But if you do need to, click on the button Share, decide what sharing privileges you want to give. So the options are View, Edit, and Comment. So let's make it Edit. You've either got a direct link that you can copy, or you can write somebody's email. You can put that in there. And then they'll get an email once you hit Send. So one thing to stress, and this is really important, is that we're very much trying to operate as an open platform where we want to enable people to come in and work collaboratively together. However, so I was reading a book, some of the things that we're trying to do here, sort of borrowed from the Bernie Sanders campaign. It's a great book from the people who essentially managed that campaign, and their motto is, give away your passwords and get everyone involved. And I definitely subscribe to that, but they also talked about an example where a troll got into their spreadsheet and messed it all up, and that was very annoying for everyone. So I think that the principle that we want to employ is those who need access can have access, and anyone really, more or less within reason can view whatever. But there's not really much point giving everybody that doesn't need it edit access. Also, because sometimes mistakes happen, your cat comes and writes your essay for you. I mean, that would be all right. But things can go wrong. So just sort of making sure that we're sensible about who has edit access. The whole point of putting it on here is we don't want to lose work and set things back. Okay, so that's how you share things in Google Docs. And then just a couple of short points. So another handy feature, so if you highlight something, you can either just directly come over here and add a comment. This doesn't look right, or whatever it might be. Please check numbers. And it will have your name, and you can kind of have a little dialogue about that. And then when you're happy that it's resolved, you can just click Resolve. I wouldn't use it for notes that you actually want to keep, because as you just saw, when I clicked Resolve, it disappeared. But that's handy if it's just corrections and things like that.
What do you use for notes that you want to keep? Work is very stressful in that.
Yeah, so if you have notes you want to keep, I think they should be sent via email or written directly in the document. So often when I'm working on a document, I will do a kind of line across the bottom, and I might even put something like this. So the idea being that that's the end of the document, and everything below it is notes. So maybe I might rework a paragraph and keep it at the bottom in case I need something from it. So either at the bottom of the document, although the final document you might not want the notes. So either a different Google Doc or an email, I would say is sensible. Yeah, so I think it's a good thing to bear in mind. So also bearing in mind, particularly if you're used to, if it's normally the case for you that you're using a Word document where it's only you who is editing it, then it's a slightly different mindset and etiquette when you've got a document that lots of people are working on. So, for example, let's say that I write a document, so maybe I'm the document owner, and I ask some people to proofread it, which is always a really important thing to do with any document before it gets made public. Then I might get a bit upset if somebody rewrites, a paragraph that I was really very, you spent a lot of time writing it, and what you really want is just corrections of grammar or something like that. So what you can do, the default is you're in editing mode, and you can change it to suggesting, or as we just saw, you can make a comment. So this is not spelled correctly. Well, let's just say. Let's say, for example, the sentence was, or the 3 words, this was not, and maybe it was written by a non-native, and the native speaker is reviewing it, and they say, actually, there's a mistake in tense, and it's this is not. It's actually a lot more efficient to use suggesting, because then all you have to do is come along and approve the change, and it should be done afterwards. But yeah, so just think, being mindful, are we suggesting or are we writing over somebody's text? Does that make sense for everyone? Okay, great. All right, so last point on this would just be that you can also export, 2 last points. One is that you can make a copy. So for templates, that's particularly useful to come in, make a copy, and it always has the prefix of copy of whatever it was called before. So you might want to delete that and give it a new name. And the working group, so the group it's in, by default, it won't be shared with the same people. It'll just be for you. Also, copying comments and suggestions can be useful, otherwise you lose them. But what you can also do is download as, and you can even download as a PDF. So that's really useful. Also, if you're using things like Google Sheets, so Google Spreadsheets, which is just as powerful really as Excel, apart from a few kind of graph functions, you can download that as an Excel or as a CSV, which is also handy if you're working with data. And I would suggest that if you're sending a document to sort of somebody who's not working on it, it's often better to be sending a PDF or a Word document rather than a link to the sort of source material, if you like. All right, I think that's kind of everything. I'm just trying to think if there's anything more on here. No, I think that's probably it. Does anyone have any questions or comments on any of that?
I'd maybe just add that we have the time machine function, right? So there's like really good version controls in there. So if some troll ever came in and messed up your spreadsheet, you could always go back to any iteration, right?
I'm not sure you can with just normal. Have you used that or?
Yeah, I think so. It's been a while though.
Yeah. Maybe we could look into that. Yeah. I
think it's called the time machine.
I think that might be an add-on or something, but maybe we can have a look into that one. Yeah, I mean, it can get quite complicated quite quickly if something has gone wrong, but you can get backups. I guess the main thing is just to think, if there's something that you're working on where it's a really important document, a suggestion can be to create a copy, for example, every day, and have that in an archive folder. Actually, yeah, just on that. So one thing that, where were we? Yeah, one thing that is worth just mentioning So let's say we're working in this folder. What can be helpful is to have an archive folder, which is effectively where you're storing backups, working documents, and it might even be that you want to have within the archive folder, subfolders again. But the idea being that there should be the most recent working document at the top level of the folder. Ideally, this would actually have a sensible name and then a date, like 9th of March 2019 or 2019. And it might be then that when you go into the archive, you might find the older versions. But the point is, if you think about somebody coming fresh to your folder, and it might be the case that there are new people joining your working group, you don't want them to have to look through 20 documents that they have no idea about. Other good practice would include having a kind of README file that explains the other documents that you're working on, and basically what's going on.
Sam, I found that if you go to, sorry, it's not called the time machine, that was maybe the thing, but if you go to File and then down to Version History.
Is that in the Google document itself?
Yeah.
So
you go
File, yeah.
Version History, just above where
Yeah.
and see Version History. Then this will just I don't know how it sort of starts a new version.
Okay, yeah, so restore version would be up here.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
if there was like a version from last week that
Right.
you wanted to make a copy of,
Okay,
you'd
yeah.
be able to find it in here.
Yeah, that's good. That looks like, I
If you
haven't
go
actually
to
seen that
one of
before.
your big documents that you've been working on for ages, then
Yeah.
it'll probably be better. But I mean,
Probably best I don't reset it to
sure.
before. But yeah, thanks. Okay, good spot. Does anyone else have any comments, questions? All right, okay, so last thing then is just go over Trello. So let me see if, yeah, I'm just thinking, you had an account already, Julian, I can use, right? Yeah, okay, so let's just go back over to here. Here we go, yeah. Okay, so just sort of to recap, Gmail for email. If you are working on some top secret project with us or otherwise, there is other things like Proton Mail, which is encrypted, but I think it's just a lot easier for all on Gmail. Google Calendar for scheduling meetings, making sure everyone's got a Hangout link. Google Docs, so it's all in the cloud and we can all find what's going on. Just being mindful that we don't delete each other's work. And then in terms of thinking about kind of project management, because in a way there's lots of mini projects with this big project. Trello is a really helpful tool. Again, it's free and you can collaborate online. So there's a few different ways of thinking about this. So we're going to go through them. I'd say there's using it as a personal to-do list, which is kind of how this is set up. And then we've got thinking about, say, a group and different people working on different things. And then the last one would be kind of like an overall team project management board. So we'll go over them one by one to make sure that all makes sense. So if we think about what we've been talking about today, this idea of, let's just have a look if we get rid of that for a sec. So if you want a bit more space, and you can change the backgrounds on this, so whatever you fancy. So let's say done then is our kind of review at the end of the week. That's where we're going to move things. Let's rename this to priority. Yeah, so let's say this is our to-do list. So based on what we discussed today, it might be that actually the way you want to work is at, say, the start of your day, you might come to your to-do list and have a think about what it is that actually is the most important thing for the day. So let's say it's actually, so you might start by reordering the list and thinking, oh, hang on a minute, actually it's task 2 that's the most important. And then you might say, well, okay, that's what I'm going to put my energy into. So I'm going to move that over here. Clarity of mind, I'm not feeling too stressed. My to-do list is manageable. It's only one thing. Experimented with quite a few different things over the years, but I think it is at a maximum, I would say, setting yourself 3 targets for a day is quite satisfying if they're achievable. If they're not achievable, just keep it to 1. I think one of the worst things that you can do is constantly be feeling overwhelmed and that you're never getting on top of your to-do list. That's just kind of, beating yourself down, really. So maybe there's 3 in there, maybe there's just 1. And then whether it be at the end of the day or at the end of the week or however you're organising your time, moving that over to the done category. So that's sort of how I would suggest, very simply, using this for a personal, as a personal board. There are other things you can do in here, like giving it a label, like, I don't know, maybe that's the green thing. I think you have to pay for some of these features, but you can add, let's just say when's the due date. Okay, that you have to pay for that. That's great. Attachments, and you can link again to things like Google Drive. Let's have a look. So can I add? And you can add other people. I think it depends on the level of your account. But that's quite handy as well, particularly if you're working, as we'll see in a moment, on a team board. But yeah, it's really just a tool to help with that kind of project management or personal time management. All right, so let's create a new board. So now let's say we've got a working group board. So this might be where we would say, okay, maybe we've got the, let's just call it something like jobs to be done effectively by the group overall. And now we're going to maybe we're going to meet up once a week or once every 2 weeks, and we're going to, allocate them between different people. Okay, so you might end up with lots of different tasks, and when you meet up, what you're really trying to think about is, okay, well, it turns out Alice is actually really great at graphic design. She's always wanted to do it. Great, well, she can be allocated that task. Or, maybe John is particularly passionate about X. So it's just having a kind of dashboard to see who is supposed to be doing what in one place. And what I would suggest doing is trying to kind of keep your boards manageable so that you can actually just see them in one, because you can actually create, a million different boards, but that means you have to then scroll from left to right, which means you might not always see them. So that's one way of thinking about it, and it might be that, it depends. Experiment with different things. You can archive the tasks, so then they just disappear. That means they're not kind of kept in a done column, so you might want to think about whether or not that makes sense. Okay, so then the last version of that would be more of a kind of project management board. Now I don't know if this is going to work because we need to add a plugin. Let's just see if this works. So this is called Elegant, and it's a free Chrome extension that works with Trello. Yeah, okay, maybe this is helpful. This is actually just giving an example. Let's see if we can see this. So this is a sort of big, long, complicated looking board that they've put out there. Lots of stuff going on. And if we, so you can also have, like they've said here, a board that, a little bit like a Google Doc, the admins can edit and then people can view it. Let's just see if this works. that work? That's activate. Maybe I need to be an admin. Okay, so let's try getting back to that. Refresh. Yeah, okay, hopefully that'll work. Right, great. Okay, so if we go back to the board as we were creating it earlier, so maybe we're planning an Interdependence Day event, and there are various different things that we need to do in the run up to that event to prepare for it, and they're going to have to happen sequentially. So let's just say, maybe we've got like week 1, week 2, week 3. So if we go now to a particular task, and yeah, okay, right. So you've got dates where you're essentially saying, this is when I'm going to be doing this particular task. So this is kind of giving us the next week or next few days. So we'll just go with that. Like we looked at a moment ago, you can set a deadline. So perhaps next Wednesday is the deadline. You can also get it to send you emails and remind you what's going on. So we're just going to add one more task so that we can actually see what's going on. Oops. Okay, we're going to make that green. Okay, so when that previous task we created finishes, we then need to do this new one. So if we just set the dates for that, and you have to enable it as being visible for Elegant, and I think you can only have something like 20 cards within a particular column, and at the top here you've got this little visible thing. So if we now go to the top, where we've got effectively our Elegant Gantt chart, it's not very big actually, let me see if I can make that bigger. Okay, can't quite see how I made that bigger, but you can see here you've got that particular task. So you can see this is what a Gantt chart is, essentially, and organize your time accordingly. And as you can imagine, if the board was more like this, then there we go, it's gonna, okay, there we go, that's a better example. So you can see certain projects are obviously more complicated than others, and they've also added in dependencies, but it really helps everybody visualize, what needs to happen by what time, and perhaps who's involved in that project. So these are the kinds of tools that enable teams to work remotely, actually very efficiently, if used well, but you've ultimately got to find what works. So if this doesn't work for your team, don't feel like you have to be using it. It can be useful. Does anyone have any comments, questions? All right, great. Well, in that case, we'll wrap it up. Let me just check.